Hey everybody, welcome to Drive Thru Review 718. Today we're going to talk about 300 Earth and Water. This is coming from Nuts Publishing and Yasushi Nakaguro. And this is a two-player game, and it's set in the time period of the movie 300, but it's nothing like the movie. Basically, it takes place over 5 Persian incursions or invasions into Greek territory. And it's a two-player game. There is asymmetric powers, but it's a quick game. Let's see, the box says 40 minutes, and that is about right. But let's jump down to the table, and I'll show you how it works, and then I'll come back and give you my thoughts. Okay, here you can see I've got the board set up for both players, and this is how setup will look. You'll have here a round tracker, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and these are the 5 separate invasions by Persia into Greece. Then you have here a score tracker. So it starts kind of in the middle, and then as you score each round, this will move back and forth. So at the end of the 5th round, let's say it was over here, then the Greek player then would win basically 3-0 that way. But as points are scored, if Persia scored points on a later round, then this will start to move slowly backwards towards the other side and vice versa. And as you can see here, the Greek forces are in red. These little cubes represent different troop units. These discs here, which are in the ocean spaces, these are fleets, and so you got 2 here and these 2 separate cities for Persia and a fleet, and then these fleets and troops here for Greece. Now if you look off to the side here, you can see Persia has quite a lot more troops than is available to Greece here, as well as some more fleets. Now both sides have 3 dice in their color, and then Persia also has this pontoon bridge, which they can take and build during one of the build steps each round. And there is also here a deck of cards which you can also purchase during that build step. So the game is broken up into a few different phases here. Now the first thing you're going to notice here on the board is the steps for doing your build, or the game calls it your preparation phase. So we're sitting out here on the Greece side, so you can see you always get 6 talents or 6 build points basically, and you can use one of those to buy a card, one of those to buy a troop and deploy it, or one of those to buy a fleet. And you can see here that you can build 2 or less fleets during that preparation step. You can do as many troops as you want, and you can only buy up to 6 cards because you only get 6 points. Now for Persia, we'll rotate the board around this way. Now typically Persia gets 12 talents or 12 build points, but if they have held a card from a previous round, they only will get 10. Typically they'll want to discard all their cards to get those extra build points, but sometimes not if they have a good card. Now they can buy up to 6 cards, 1 point each, 1 talent each, as many troops as they want, up to 2 fleets they can deploy, and then they can build or rebuild sometimes the pontoon bridge, but this costs them 6, so it'll cost you at least half of your talents there. Now before we get too much further, I will say that they did actually send me a little mini bit of errata here. Just basically 2 simple things. There's one example in the rule book that's a little bit wrong. It's not too much of a big deal, but there is a nice clarification here on the Leonidas card, which is one of the cards that you can get out of there, and it just gives you a little addendum to clarify how long his effect lasts for. So definitely take a look at this. I'm sure it'll be on the BGG forums, but just a couple of little quick clarifications there. Now the preparation step is always done in the order of the Persians first and then Greece. So what we might do, for example, is maybe the first thing we'll want to do is build this pontoon bridge, and this gives us a way to move our troops from kind of the Asian landmass here over this bridge into Greece, into Europe over there. Typically then, if you don't have this, the only way for Persia to get their troops over there is by fleet transfers, which will carry troops. So you might spend 6 points, 6 talents to get that bridge up, and then you might put out some troops here. Now troops can always go into your 2 hometowns. You can see here for Persia we've got Ephesus and Abydos, and I'm going to butcher all these names. So these are their 2 main towns here, and then Greece basically always controls, unless the other team controls, Athens and Sparta there. So you can always put troops in your main cities there. So maybe we've spent 6 points on the pontoon, we'll do 2 there and 2 there, so we've got 8 and 10. And then the one thing I didn't really mention, I showed it, but the fleets here actually cost 2 for the Persians there. So there actually is an optional rule if you want to do it. I've not played with it where these only cost 1 for Persia. I've only played it with the base rules there. So maybe I'll throw in an extra fleet down here to go along with these guys there. So once I'm done building, then Persia can go. Now the other thing that you can do, of course, is for one talent or one build point, you can buy a card. So you can just buy a card and it goes right into your hand. Now the cards here are all dual purpose. If the Greek player has the card, they're just concerned with the top part of the event. And if the Persian player buys a card, then they're concerned with the bottom. Now on your turn, after we go through the two planning or preparation steps, you're going to be playing these cards. Now you can play the card for the event and do what it says, or you can play the card and actually do like a troop movement or a fleet movement. So the cards are effectively your actions. So after both sides build and deploy, maybe we'll say, we'll just put some other troops and stuff out here and deal out a couple of cards to players. And then you're going to go into your operations phase. Now it is worth noting though, there is a special card in here that if the Persian player purchases it, it will effectively short circuit that round. That round will immediately end, and then you actually will not do any supply phase or scoring phase that you normally would do at the end of the round. And that card here is called the sudden death of the great king. So one of their kings will effectively die, and then that will just short circuit it, and you'll discard everything down and then basically just go right into a new round. So you've got to be very careful about this. And then this can also be triggered during the course of a round. So if somebody triggers this through some other card action that interacts with this, you still will do, in that case, the supply and the scoring. But if you draw this and buy it as the Persian player, you're going to immediately trigger the end of that round there. Now when you do that, you're going to take one of your cubes here, and you will lose this cube forever, and mark here first Darius. Darius will be the first one to die, and then Xerxes. And then that's it. So if this ever triggers again, you'll just ignore that because Artemisia won't do it. So it's only going to happen twice. You only lose 2 of your troops. But then once that's done, then this will have no effect anymore. Now into the operations phase, you'll play the card, and like I said, either do the event, and there's a whole variety of events. There's only 16 cards in the deck, so it is kind of a knowable deck. But there is a variety of events that allow you to do like a normal move, but with an extra bonus and so on. But typically, if you play the card for just its normal movement, there's a few things you can do. The first thing you can do is you can move troops, and you can move them as far as you want until you hit either a city with nobody. So maybe we'll just pick up and move all these 3 troops, and you can do this all for one card play. You'll take a group of troops and move them somewhere, and they all have to end up in the same spot, and we'll just move them there, and that's it. The other movement you can do is you can take some fleets here from any of these sort of port places and move them to anywhere you want on the board. Now when you do that, you can transport up to 3 troops with you and then move them in there, but the maximum amount of troops you can transport, no matter how many of the fleets you move, is 3. Now in the case of, let's say we move these up here, these troops, and we move them, then we're going to have a conflict. And if similarly, if we move these fleets into here, we would also have a conflict, and you'll immediately go into kind of a combat phase when you have an interaction like that. And you have troops or fleets in the same zone, then you'll go into combat. And combat works pretty simple. You will take and count the number of cubes or discs you have. So let's just use this as an example. We've got 3 Persians and 2 Greeks. And so you're going to take one die for each cube, or disc in that case, and then roll, and then whoever gets the highest number, let's just use an example here, we go, is going to then win that combat. Now this is terrible for Greece because they got 2 ones, and so obviously Persia has a 6, but any roll by Persia that's higher than a 4 becomes a 4. So 5s and 6s actually only count as a 4 unless they are over here in their kind of hometowns here in Asia, then they cap out at 5. And the same goes for the fleets as well. So it's the same kind of thing. So even if we did this, let's say we had 1, 5, and 6, but then the Greek player got a 5, they would actually win because again, these count as 4. Now if there was a tie, let's say they rolled a 4 there, then neither side will win and both sides will lose a unit there. Now in this case, let's go back to our original example. Persia won, so they have 1, and so then Greece is forced to remove one of their units, and the same idea here for fleet combat. Now at that point, whoever was the attacker that initiated it could choose to retreat, and if they retreat, they'll go back to the adjacent town, or the fleets will go to some neighboring port there. If the attacker chooses to stay in, then the defender, if they want, then they could retreat as well, but if they both stay in, then you'll just have another round of combat until either one side gets wiped out, or somebody decides to retreat. So the turns are very simple. You basically play a card for an event or to move a fleet or transport some troops, and that's away you go. And then you're going to play until both sides pass. Now you can, if you have cards in your hand, you can decide to pass and maybe even keep those cards, or maybe pass to see what your opponent is going to do. But once you run out of cards, then you have to pass. And once both sides have passed consecutively, we're going to go to the supply phase. But if I pass and then you go, I can get back in. Now the supply phase works a little bit differently for each of the different sides. Now for the Persians, they can have as many cubes in their 2 home cities as they wish. They can just have a whole massive pile of these, maybe stock them up and then build them for a big kind of push in the next invasion. But for the rest of the cities, you're going to take a look and count these little supply markers here. And you're going to count all the supply markers, excluding the ones in their hometown. And then you're going to delete any cubes here that don't meet that. So now we've got a bad situation here. We've got 3 troop cubes here, but this is the only city we control outside of Asia. So we can only have 1 cube. So we'd have to get rid of 2 of these. Where let's say if these were spread out like this, now we have 2 supplies. But we still got 3 cubes, we only have to get rid of 1. So you do want to kind of branch out. This will give you more supplies, but obviously you don't want to thin down your forces too much, because then you roll less dice in combat. Now the Greek player works similarly, but they don't get to pile up as many troops as they want in their hometowns. They're just going to literally count all of the supply icons here, and there's a name for it in the rules. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's called like aphori or something. They're going to count all of these everywhere. If they happen to be over here in Asia too, they'll count those. And then they can have as many troops as they have supply icons. Now after validating supply, you're going to validate the lines of communication. That's simply just drawing a line from where your troops are at back to one of your home cities. So if this pontoon had been destroyed, if Greece had gotten here and basically took this city, then this will immediately destroy that bridge, which could be rebuilt later. But if this had been broken, then all of these guys here would be out of supply, unless you have some fleets in that town. So these fleets will give you sort of a maritime line of supply, line of communication back to your home cities. Once you figure out supply and lines of communication, then you're going to go to scoring, and you're just simply going to count up each city that you can control. And again, these bordered cities here, they actually count as 2. So if you control these, that counts as 2. So right now, let's just take a random setup of the board here. So we've got Greece. So they still control that because it's still theirs, unless there was an opposing cube. You always control that. You don't need a cube in here. So Greece has 2, 4, 5 cities they control. And then Persia has 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 that they control. And so in this case, it's 7 to 5, so the difference of 2. So then we'll move this marker 2 steps towards Persia. Now there is an instant win victory, so if either side controls both of the major cities on the opposing side, that's just an instant victory right away. Otherwise, you're going to play 5 rounds, and then wherever this marker ends up will be the winner, and it is possible to get a tie if that ends up being in the middle. Okay, so that is 300 Earth and Water. We'll just go ahead and jump into my pillars of review. It's only a 2-player game, so there's no player count to discuss. Like I said in the introduction, it says 40 minutes on the box. I've played 2 games of it. Both have been about 45 minutes, so that seems accurate to me. In terms of what is this game like? Well, I think this is kind of sort of in the vein of a game like 13 Days or Watergate, where it's a quick 2-player, somewhat card-driven game that it sort of takes place, based on some kind of historical event. And the funny thing is Watergate takes place probably over, I don't know, a year, I'm guessing. And 13 Days takes place over 13 days. 13 Days is kind of like a quick 45-minute Twilight Struggle that takes place all during the Cuban Missile Crisis. This takes place over a much longer period of time, but it's that same kind of historical vibe there. So yeah, it's kind of in that ballpark. So if you like those kind of games, those kind of quick, kind of war, historical type games, I think you're really going to like this, because I really do enjoy this. It seems about like every year, every other year or so, there's a nice, like 30 to 45 minute, nice historical game, usually card driven. And this is, I think this is the one for 2021, honestly. It's really, really good. I really enjoy this. There's 2 sides. The kind of takeaway for me is the 2 sides are very asymmetrical. You have a lot of resources at your disposal in terms of the Persians, and so you can really rush out and or try to slow boat it and build up a big force and then try to rush out that way. But you're much inferior in combat, and the cards vaguely seem better for the Greeks in general. So the Greeks are more efficient fighters. They're just more efficient overall, and they can get away with quite a bit. And I will say that there is some nuance to how you use the cards as well. Because I saw in one game where I think it was 1 or 2 Greek soldiers basically took out like 6 or 7 Persians. So you think even with the odds stacked against the Persians with the dice, they would get some victories, but they didn't. But looking back on that event, I can see how myself, the Persian player, should have played the cards actually a little bit differently to sort of, you can kind of get some cards to kind of adjust those odds, give you a little bit of a bonus if you attack immediately, and there's all kinds of cool little effects and abilities there. So I was thinking, oh, if I'd have done these actually in the reverse order, which wasn't, obvious to me going into it, then I would have had a much better chance and I would have been able to, probably fare better that way. So based on how the dice happened. Anyway, so what I have seen though is there are some different strategies that you can take. So there is a good amount of variability to the game. I would say there's a whole ton of it because it's only a 30, 45 minute game, but you could like build up all your troops as a Persian player and spend all your time doing that and have a very, very quick round. Like you can have a round that goes super quick. Even if you don't draw that Death of the King card, you can say, what? I'm not even going to buy any cards. I'm just going to spend all my points building troops up, defend that. Yeah, Greek's going to get some points because they're going to get and build up some of their, conquer some of the towns and the cities out there. They're going to build some points. That's fine. Great. Next round, I'm coming at you. So next round, I'm going to spend a whole bunch of money or talent building or buying cards and then just come at you. And because you will see when that death card comes out, so what you really want is the Greek player to draw early, because then they'll have to play, you'll see, oh, they played it and they moved some troops with it. I don't have to worry about that till we go through the deck. And now I can really build up and zoom in on them. But the Greek player can keep cards too. So like I said in the walkthrough, if the Persian player keeps one card, they can keep most one card, then their talents are reduced for the following round, so they have less money to spend. But the Greek player can keep up to 4 cards. And so they could kind of hold that card back or pretend like they're holding it back to make the Persian player afraid to buy cards. Because once you buy cards, then, it just short circuits you. Especially like in the last 2 rounds, you don't want that to happen because you might be setting up to where maybe you gave some ground to the Greeks expecting to be able to make this big final push in the last invasion. And then that doesn't happen because one of your kings dies. Which back then would be a huge deal. So so there is some kind of little idiosyncrasies and all that stuff and nuance to the card buying and the card playing and all that kind of stuff. There's some special like Sparta cards. They have like kind of a different colored border on the top of it. And so there's cards that the Persian can get to kind of counteract those. And so that adds kind of a neat historical flavor. And so we've seen in a couple of games where it wasn't exactly historically accurate, but it was like, oh, this could have been like a what if scenario with the little Spartan that took out all the Persians. And then, maybe the Persian guy had this little counter ability, which kind of twisted history. So for all of the simplicity and the minimalistic parts of the game, the way that things sort of interweave themselves, the real, very clean asymmetry with some of the coloring up and the window dressing of some of the card events and stuff, it does still provide that historical flavor and that kind of what if quality of it. So I definitely recommend this game pretty much for anybody, but especially if you're into some historical games or war games like that and you want a quick one to play that's going to be rewarding, and you're going to get a good number of plays out of this before I think you have to put it away for a while and then come back to it later. But definitely recommend 300. Take a look at it. It's coming out about now from Nuts Publishing, and I believe, I want to say Ares Games is publishing it in the United States. I could have that wrong, but check the BoardGameGeek.com page for it. But it is now going to be brought over in more readily available for the US. So thanks. soon.